address in the absence of Professor S.K. Satish. We like to call upon Professor J. Srinivasan. J. Srinivasan is a graduate of IIT from Madras 1969. He did his MS in the State University, New York, and a PhD in Stanford University. And he is the founder of the DALYs Center Climate Change, past chairman, and also emeritus distinguished professor at the DALYs Center till date. He is the honorary professor of Center for Atmospheric and Oceanic Studies in Institute of Science till date. He is the lead author for the second and fourth IPCC report of the climate change and a review of the editor for the third report. And his major scientific contributions are in the area of monsoon models and climate change. He received Lifetime Achievement Award by the Ministry of Earth Science in 2019. Since I know he's been here for 3.5 years, I know him as a man with values, very disciplined personality, with a simplistic way of leading his life, with helping hand, with the academic zeal to propagate knowledge. And I like to make this statement, Nobel laureate Sir C.V. Raman was his uncle. And we feel proud to say that, sir, over to you to welcome the people. Speakers
thank you, Dr. Parmesh. On behalf of Professor S.K. Satish, I welcome you all to this seminar series. Dr. Parmesh has ensured that we have this seminar on the last Thursday of every month. This time it is on the last but one Thursday, so that you can enjoy your New Year's Eve. So this time he has chosen the right topic because of the National Influenza Vaccination Week. And the topic is there a need for global flu vaccination to everyone? And we have an eminent speaker, Professor Ravi, a virologist from NIMHANS. And I request Dr. Parmesh to introduce him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Distinguished members of the DHS Center Climate Scientists and PhD students and members of the ComHead National Chapter, AP, and members of the Lakeside Education Trust. Good morning, good evening, good night, and all of you, whichever part of the world you are in.
15 minutes late.
Okay, sir. All right. Now, my job is to give an introductory remark on the subject and also the introduction of the chairman and the speaker. Now, while talking this morning, some of the students asked, sir, we don't know anything about immunity and all things. Everybody is talking. Can you just highlight about few minutes during? I said that definitely. When we were a student, we had to hear about only blood. Is there three cells? One is RBC to carry the oxygen, WBC the defense system, platelet is only for clotting. Until 12th standard we did it. Now the immunology has spread such a vast way since early 70s. Now various sub-departments already there. Our environment has a huge range of pathogens, toxic substances and allergens. To weed off these pathogens, we have a very vigilant immune system which gives 3 levels of protection: physical barrier and inborn immediate response, adaptive immune system. Only thing we had only one cell WBC. Now we can think of 8 important cells for you to remember. One is epithelium. Epithelium is a barrier. Respiratory tract, intestinal tract, all the epithelium is a big barrier. In that epithelial cells, we have the goblet cells that produces the mucus. Jacob is there. That produces the mucus. We produce 1 liter of mucus in the respiratory tract, 2/3 from the upper respiratory tract, 1/3 from the lungs. From the lungs, it goes up far upwards, and nose it goes backwards when you swallow it. That also, this mucus don't let the germs attach to the cell. That way it protects. Then we have dendritic cell. Just below the mucous membrane, we have, these are all custom officers. They won't let any cell, anything enter inside. They squeeze everything on all this thing. Then they take that presenter cell to our brain of the immune system, that is T lymphocyte. It is the brain of the immune system. That T lymphocyte, brain of immune system, they decide which part to go. If it is an infection, you produce antibodies, IgG, IgM. And if it is allergic, you produce IgE. That's what it used to tell. And next comes the T lymphocyte. There are about 4 T lymphocytes, important. One is the killer cell. This T helper cell, tells killer cell, go and kill the cancer cells which is there every day in the body, kill everything, whatever it is, you kill the bacteria. That would tell that. And also, if it is a, then comes the suppressor cell. If these helper cell keep on stimulating the killer cell to kill the all the cells, and also stimulate the B lymphocyte produce antibodies, overproduction will be happen within autoimmune diseases, a whole lot of other diseases. That's why the suppressor said, Baba, you did enough job, don't do anything like that. You have to have a balance. T suppressor cell is also there. Life is a balance of defense system. Then you have the T memory cells. If there is an infection, when the infection wins off, and this memory cell remembers that one, next time any reinfection comes, it will produce antibody, because these are all the 4 important cells are there. And the T lymphocyte then stimulate the B lymphocyte, next one, to produce the antibodies. Next you have, if things don't work, then they call the muscle man of your own system. That is none other than a mast cell. He got various chemicals produced in his cells, and new production produce various chemicals, cytokines, named and influence the cell, and the battle will be there. If the battle cannot be won, he calls other cells for the big war. Those are all called eosinophils, that the most hated cell from the parasites. Then we have the neutrophils, natural defense system of the body, various cells. These are all the 8 cells control our thing, various way, intricate way, and producing various chemical mediators. Now, to our defense system activate by direct infection or by the vaccination. Vaccination is a passive way to enhance our defense system against a particular germ. The flu vaccine is recommended to all people with chronic illness to reduce the suffering during the season. The Federal Drug Administration, WHO, Center for Disease Control, and public health experts collaborate on review of the influenza disease global surveillance data and predict the possible strain that cause most illness in the upcoming season, and recommend the manufacturer to produce the vaccine for this particular year. The flu vaccine for the year 21-22 was decided in the month of March, like every year like that, 5th of 20 in Silver Spring, Maryland, and recommend influenza A and B components of, there are 4 strains. The influenza A, H1N1, A, H3N2, and B variety Victoria lineage and Amagata linkage, the quadrivalent vaccine. The flu vaccine recommended to everyone above 6 months and the age during this the flu season, except in people like infants less than 6 months, people with allergy to gelatin or eggs, which are the ingredients of the vaccine, having had allergic reaction to the previous shot, and having had some Guillain-Barré in a temporary paralysis syndrome, in the people who are not feeling completely healthy. During the talk, the speaker going to talk about the pros and cons of the flu vaccine. I'll discuss in addition to that, what happened to memory cell? When the memory cell is working, do we still need so many vaccines? These are all the issues we'll be talking it about. To talk about this topic, we have none other than an eminent person, Professor Ravi. He the former senior professor and head of the NIMHAS as a public health virology. He had done Japanese B encephalitis, acute encephalitis syndrome, involved in the development of the indigenous kits for the AIDS therapy, immunology and the pathogenesis viral infection in central nervous system, and psychoneuroimmunology. We were core committee member H1N1 pandemic in 2009 when we were there, and he's the one found out the cytokine storm in the high mortality people. He is in the Sputnik COVID-19 vaccine international advisory board member of the COVID-19 advisory board of Karnataka. He received many awards locally, nationally, globally. He has many scientific papers to his
This is
credit,
perfect.
chapters in the
When
textbook,
that allow me to
innovation,
speak, then I speak.
and also the most sought after versatile speaker with facts and various forums. That is what welcome Ravi. In addition to that, to chair this session, we have none other than Jacob John as a dear friend of mine. Jacob John is a pediatrician and FRCP and is a clinical virologist. He has done PhD. He retired professor of HOD Department Clinical Virology, CMC Vellore. In 1994, he was the president of Indian Associate Medical Microbiologist. In 1999, he was the president of Indian Academy of Pediatrics. Currently, he is the chairman and Child Health Foundation and co-chair of the India Expert Advisory Group, Measles Rubella Examination. Now, as a person to lead discussant, we have none other than Dr. Jagdish Chinnappa. He is a pediatrician known he is the head of the department pediatric of Manipal Hospital, and he was the immediate past president of the respiratory chapter of Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and he'll be there, Doctor. Over to you, Jacob. Take over, sir. Thank you. Nice
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's a pleasure to be with you all, particularly Parmesh, with whom I haven't had association or face-to-face meeting for the last 5 years or so. Hi, Ravi. How are you? You know, I'm very happy that you have taken this topic of flu vaccination today, because everybody is focused on one particular disease and its various vaccines. There are a lot of similarities between these two, but there are also a lot of dissimilarities. One thing is very clear. Pediatricians know immunization inside out. Adult physicians, particularly those who are dealing with COVID, and even immunologists, are not familiar with the immunology of vaccinology. And I was horrified when they said that 2 doses fully vaccinated. In pediatrics, we will laugh it off. 2 doses is the beginning of the priming. If you don't boost, your immunity is not complete. So anyway, all these issues are there. Back to influenza. A much understood, underestimated problem. And since we don't have in India a system of counting every case by diagnosis, we are missing a lot. Problems in pregnant women, we are missing them. Problems in infancy and young children, we are missing them. So influenza is a very much underestimated problem, and we need to learn more about it. And I'm so happy that this seminar is put together. I hope it is being recorded, because it will be of great use for medical profession, pediatricians and internists and geriatrics people, so that I hope people will learn more about influenza and influenza prevention. It's such an easily preventable disease. We don't even have a national policy about influenza control. So we need to move forward. And you have 2 very eminent persons, Ravi in virology and Jagdish Chinnappa in pediatrics. So over to you, Ravi, and then we will follow with questions and discussion. Ravi.
Namaskar. Thank you very much, sir. It's a great honor and a privilege to be on this forum. I must thank my dear friend Dr. Parmesh for having me to speak here. I'm especially very privileged and honored to be talking in front of my mentor. Professor Jacob John has been one of the most powerful mentors I've had in my career. Our association goes back to 40 years. Next year it will be 40 years. I met him in 1982 when he came as visiting professor when I was doing my microbiology at JIPMER. Since then, he has been a well-wisher, he has guided me, So whatever good things I learned is because of him. Whatever bad things I learned or did is not because of him. I'll start with that particular disclaimer, so to say. And I also want to say that um, I am a very biased individual. I'm biased because I think, much like Professor Jacob John, I am a person who subscribes to immunizations because they are very practical in terms of uh, the prevention aspect of any disease, especially a huge disease like influenza. I'm trying to share my screen. Just give me a minute. Okay. It's just opening up. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Is it full screen?
Full screen ಅಲ್ಲ?
How do I get it to full screen?
Correct, sir. Yes,
How
full
do-
screen.
It's full screen?
Yeah.
Everybody is able to see the slide completely?
Yeah.
Thank you. I was asked by Dr. Paramesh, because it's National Influenza Immunization Week, to talk on, is there a need for global flu vaccination? What I will do in the next 30 minutes is to talk to you about a brief introduction and maybe try to argue with you why do we need influenza vaccines? What are the types of vaccines? Do vaccines work? This has become a very big question, as Professor Jacob John very rightly said. COVID has brought in so much of discussion on immunization efficacy. Every common man now talks about, and WhatsApp is an open university where there are only professors and no students. And it's a forum where all sorts of opinions are expressed. And I would also like to end by telling some of the challenges that exist in making influenza universally available for everybody. Now, influenza virus is very much like COVID virus and RNA virus. As you know, viruses are the tiniest of living organisms. They have two types of genetic material, either RNA or DNA. Now, in the case of influenza viruses, they have RNA, and not only that, they have 8 segments of RNA. Unlike COVID virus, it has one long strand of RNA. Here, there are 8 different strands of RNA that are available, and that makes it a little more complicated and challenging because the influenza virus itself is spherical. On its surface, it is studded with proteins. Two important proteins I would request you to remember. One is called hemagglutinin and the other is called neuraminidase. Hemagglutinin is abbreviated as H and neuraminidase is abbreviated as N. And to complicate matters more, there are several types of hemagglutinin protein and several types of neuraminidase protein. And they are designated H1 to H16 and N1 to N9. And these proteins can be in various combinations. To give you an example, H1 and N1, H3 and N2, H7, N9, and so on. So basically you have to multiply 16 by 9. That is the theoretical possibility of the various types of influenza viruses you will get. Broadly, influenza viruses are classified into 3 different species: influenza A, influenza B, and influenza C. Influenza A and B cause infections in human beings, and As I already mentioned, influenza A can be divided into subtypes, innumerable number of subtypes, and these subtypes can further be differentiated genetically. They are called clades, and then we have subclades. Much like what we are seeing in COVID, where you say that the parent Wuhan virus, and then, of course, the variants of concern, variants of interest, even in influenza, you have all this. The biggest advantage influenza virus has in nature is the following. A, it is widely prevalent in human beings, animals, birds, and mixing of viruses between species is very common. And the pig is a notorious animal when it comes to mixing of viruses, because pigs can get infected by human viruses, they can get infected by bird viruses. And when multiple viruses infect a cell, there is a marriage that takes place, and we call it recombination. And this recombination is facilitated because there are 8 pieces of nucleic acid, unlike other viruses. So, unlike the other RNA viruses, here you have 8 strands. So, the probability of multiplication is multifold. Mathematically, it's mind-boggling. If 3 different species of viruses infect a cell, so 3 into 8 into 8, so you can imagine the number of combinations. To give you an example of whether recombination occurs in nature, not so distant in the past, you will all recall in 2009, there was a huge pandemic of influenza, which was called the swine flu popularly. It was called swine flu because the backbone of the virus that caused this pandemic was contained a lot of pig influenza virus genes. It also had bird influenza virus genes and human influenza virus genes. So whenever combinations occur, then the antigenic makeup of the virus changes, and we normally refer it to as a shift or a drift. As the names indicate, depending on the extent to which the virus structure and proteins have changed, we call it either a shift or a drift. So, influenza itself is a clinical illness that is characterized by fever, cold, cough. These are the commonest symptoms that one gets in influenza. Both type A and type B viruses affect human beings, as I said, and the clinical symptoms are indistinguishable between type A and type B virus. Normally, it's a mild illness in majority of the individuals, much like COVID. Some people are asymptomatic. Many of them do have symptoms. A small proportion of them land up with severe. And this severe disease is more the body's reaction to the viral infection than the virus itself causing damage to the tissues of the body. Like in other viral infections, influenza can also affect the heart. It can cause myocarditis. It can affect the muscle, cause myositis. Very rarely it can go to the brain. Influenza can cause encephalitis. And of course, in people who have other comorbidities, meaning diabetes or hypertension or pre-existing respiratory disease or cancers, it does produce a severe form of illness, also in the immunocompromised. So there are parallels between COVID and influenza in many ways. As Professor Jacob John said, there are also some distinguishing features. While on influenza, one should always remember that in children there is a rare syndrome known as Reye's syndrome, which is a complication of influenza, and Professor John has done a great deal of work on it. Those who have questions can address it to him. Why are we belaboring so much about influenza? The disease burden of influenza is huge. I'll go to the next slide and then come back to this slide. This is a bubble graph. A bubble graph based on the size of the bubble indicates the burden of the disease. This is about 3 years old. You can see influenza is ranked highest in burden of disease.
Slide is not changed.
I'm sorry.
Slide is not changed.
Okay, sorry, sir.
Yes, now.
This is a slide indicating burden of disease, and if you look at the burden of disease, the size of the bubble will tell you about the burden of the disease, and you can see that the biggest bubble on this map is influenza. And in terms of the burden that influenza causes, it is not precisely well estimated in all the countries. Western countries have a very good influenza surveillance system, and as I'm giving you an example, you can see this is from America, and in America you can notice that the burden, especially in the last 1 year, has been huge. There are more than 22,000 deaths that were reported in 2019 and 2020. And mind you, last year the burden of influenza was low, primarily because there were several preventive measures, non-pharmacological interventions,
Open and ask.
people were wearing masks and there was a lot of restriction of activity. So last year there was a less amount of influenza in the United States, but otherwise the burden is very huge. So we are talking of a disease that is a silent killer. And whom does it kill? As Professor Jacob John very rightly said, mortality is high in children. Mortality is also very high in the elderly. In India, many elderly people who die of pneumonias, they are not even tested for influenza. That is the sad state of affairs. And I have personally lost 3 of my colleagues at NIMHANS beyond the age of 55 due to pneumonia as a complication following influenza. So the burden is grossly understated. It is a disease of children. It is a disease of the elderly, where you see the maximum mortality and morbidity. So what do we have in terms of prevention? In terms of prevention, we have flu vaccines. But whenever you talk of a vaccine in the current context, in the current milieu, people have enormous expectations from vaccines. I'm sure Professor Jacob John will bear me out. First of all, remember that vaccines are primarily meant to prevent severe disease and death. There are very few vaccines in the world that prevent infection. But if you are vaccinated and then you get infection, you should not be landing up with severe disease or death. That, I must say, many of the vaccines are delivering, and so does influenza vaccine. But the dream influenza vaccine I'm going to show you in the next slide is what people are looking at, and that vaccine is what people want is at least 75% to be effective. When we say effective, we are referring to prevention of infection. This is a very tall order in influenza. In fact, instead of being effective, we should be asking what is the protection it gives against disease. When you look at protection against disease, I will show you in the subsequent slides, influenza vaccines have done very well. And so I would say from my standpoint that it is an excellent solution to prevent severe morbidity and mortality. Making influenza vaccines, as you can see in this slide, is not very easy. First of all, you need vaccines every year because the immunity is short-lived. The immunity is short-lived because the virus is constantly changing its outer surface, both its hemagglutinin and its neuraminidase. So the protection generated by both antibodies and as well as cell-mediated immunity lasts for a year. So since about 4 decades, the world has mastered the art of releasing vaccines of influenza based on the previous year experience, what type of viruses are circulating in the community. And to do that, there are influenza surveillance centers across the globe. India also has a national influenza surveillance network, and the nodal agency for collecting information on circulating strains is National Institute of Virology. It's a part of the global network. We submit the information to WHO. WHO usually has a meeting, and this particular slide here is showing you the calendar of events that happens in any year. First, identification of the virus that is circulating is done. Then, based on the common strains, a vaccine strain is identified. It is verified by molecular biology and cell culture methods. Then reagents are prepared, and then the technology is transferred to industry. Then it goes to production, and a vaccine comes. This whole exercise takes about 5 months to produce a vaccine for 1 year in influenza. So that is one of the challenges, but we have been doing fairly well. Now here is a map of the type of viruses that were circulating last year, just to give you a flavor. Influenza B accounts for a significant burden in many of the developing worlds, and that is represented in a yellow color on this map. Now, moving on to basic questions people ask about influenza vaccines. Now, why the questions people ask about influenza vaccines are: A, who should get influenza vaccine? And the simple answer is anyone from 6 months of age to the oldest age they live, they are eligible for vaccination. And they should, and remember, maximum mortality and morbidity is in children and in the elderly. So they definitely are people who are included in this age range. How is vaccine given? There are two types of vaccines: injectable vaccines and intranasal vaccines. Intranasal vaccines are usually administered in the nose, either in the form of a spray or using micro drops that is delivered into the nose, much like using an Otrivin nasal spray kind of devices are available, and they are usually live attenuated vaccines. Killed vaccines are given injectable, and they're given intramuscularly. How often should this vaccine be given? I already answered that question. Because the type of virus circulating continuously keeps changing every year, you should take it once a year, and the protection is definitely valid for 1 year. Who are the people who should be prioritized for vaccine? I think the answer to this question is that definitely children, definitely elderly, definitely those who are immunocompromised. Now, are there many vaccines? The answer is yes. There are different types of vaccines that are available, and these are summarized in this table. You have vaccines for children between 6 months to 2 years of age. These are vaccines that are usually grown in eggs. They are quadrivalent vaccines. They cover the most common circulating strains, and there are four type of flu strains that they give protection against, and this is the vaccine recommended for children between 6 months to 2 years. Children aged between 2 to 17 years, you can give them live attenuated influenza vaccine. Again, it's quadrivalent. This is an age where it can be administered either nasally, or if it is a killed vaccine, it is given intramuscularly. Adults can receive both the nasal vaccine as well as the inactivated vaccine. Again, vaccines can be made in cell cultures, and vaccines are also made in eggs. For people above 65 years of age, definitely you should give a quadrivalent vaccine. Generally, we do not recommend live attenuated vaccines for adults. That is because it can cause problems in terms of some severe manifestations. So generally in adults we give only killed vaccines. Now the next slide here will show you as an example the kind of vaccines that are available in the United Kingdom. There are various brands and various vaccines. I am not here to promote brands, just to tell you that depending on the age, they are flagged and they are colored and they are tagged. Now, why do we need influenza vaccines? I think by this time I've already made an argument for you, but let me articulate it much better. Why do we need vaccines? Because enough information is available that vaccines can preventing you from getting sick with flu. Vaccination also has been shown in several elegant studies to reduce severity of illness. In a 2021 study, which I'll be sharing the data with you, which is a meta-analysis of influenza vaccine efficacy, it has shown very good efficacy, both in terms of reducing hospitalization, as this point in the next slide will tell you that reducing the immunization. Yeah, here. Okay, this slide will show you exactly what I'm making the point, that flu vaccination can reduce risk of flu associated hospitalization, and especially in people who have chronic health conditions, elderly, or who have cardiac disease. The vaccine definitely makes a lot of difference to their outcomes. Pregnant women, as Professor Jacob John mentioned, we do not have sufficient information in this country, but pregnant women are prone for influenza infection and they can manifest severe disease. So also children, especially younger children, they can get severe disease. So definitely they are one group that require vaccines. In the next slide here, you will see that what I am showing you is the meta-analysis I'm talking about, paper published in June 2021 in a vaccine, a very prestigious journal, and the sum and substance of this particular paper I've encapsulated in the next slide for you. As you can see, they had searched literature and they had put together all papers where core information they have gathered. The objective was to ask whether the influenza vaccination reduces severity and reduces mortality. They had identified 18 published large series articles and tabulated the results, and the summary is there was a 20% reduction in ICU admission among adults. It ranged anywhere between 20% to 80% reduction in admissions, and also it reduced mortality significantly. The risk of hospitalization in even in outpatients was very low. The odds ratio was 0.6. So the overall conclusion of this paper was that influenza vaccination definitely reduces the hospitalization and prevents death. Even outpatient visits it reduces. So this is a case I would like to make for influenza vaccination. One question people always ask about influenza vaccines is safety. Now, safety has been a concern for almost many years, not only for influenza vaccine, for any vaccine. Let me tell you that influenza vaccines overall are very safe. There are some specific situations where the vaccine can produce side effects. And also, if you Google safety of influenza vaccines, unfortunately, the first link that comes up is the immunization that was carried in US Army soldiers when a vaccine was being developed about 60 years back, and it produced Guillain-Barré syndrome. That was an allergy to one of the proteins that was contaminating the vaccine. That kind of vaccines are not available. Nowadays, cell culture vaccines are purified, and so also the vaccines that are egg derived. Overall, the frequency of severity of influenza vaccine reactions is 1 per 100,000. That is a very acceptable limit. If you weigh the benefits and the risks of influenza vaccine, they are definitely in favor of protection. Before I end, I have two slides to share with you. One is, people always ask me, are there any other methods of preventing influenza? Of course there are. If you ask me what is the best method for preventing COVID, I will say wear masks, stay away from crowds, wash hands. You will never get COVID. The whole problem is that it is non-pharmacological interventions are very difficult to implement, to follow. Even if you follow, others have to follow. So they are very, very important. They reduce infections, but they are not the ultimate solution. The most fastest and economical way of protecting people is to use vaccines, and they give a lot of protection. Before I end, I want to share with you this particular slides concerning today's topic, and that says the main challenges in actually making influenza vaccine available for everybody. A large portion of vaccines manufactured even today are reliant on embryonated eggs, because their yield is much higher and you can produce them very fast compared to cell culture systems. And remember, we are running in a tight race of 5 months. You have to get the vaccine out so that it can be used the next year. So this is definitely one of the limitations. The time for vaccine production of conventional vaccine is rather long, minimum of 4 to 12 weeks. There's a need to vaccinate everybody every year. The virus is ever changing, so that also poses certain challenges. One of the biggest challenges, actually, the need to improve immunogenicity in elders. As you grow old, your immune system also ages, and that's called immunosenescence. And because of immunosenescence, your responses to vaccines may not be as good as they are in the young and in the middle-aged people. Cost is definitely an issue. We are talking about 700 to 900 rupees for a dose in India. So this makes it a limitation for accepting on national immunization, is the argument the bureaucrats and the politicians will give you. But if you are committed to giving vaccines, I'm sure if you health is a priority, then I'm sure we will find the resources. And lastly, the need for estimating efficacy, we are still struggling with what is the absolute laboratory correlate of protection in influenza, and that remains a puzzle, and I think that is something that will continue to remain as a puzzle. In summary, influenza, very serious illness. It can be prevented. There is no need to lose lives. There's no need for morbidity. I strongly would support vaccination, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I will be very happy to correct my mistakes or as well as try to answer questions. Over.
Thank you very much, Ravi. It was a masterful discussion in such a short time. So much of information was packed, and you spoke very slowly, and things were extremely clear. Thank you very much. Let me top up with just 2 points only. One is, what is quadrivalent vaccine? You mentioned quadrivalent. Influenza A, H1N1, the pandemic strain, and the 1968 H3N2 are co-circulating as endemic flu. So you have to have 2 A-type vaccines, H1N1, H3N2. The current antigenically drifted or non-drifted virus. So two of them. Now, influenza B is a human virus, as Ravi very nicely said. It does not infect animals or birds, circulates among humans. There are two I don't know what to call them. They're not types, what do you call them? Lineages, Ravi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Lineages.
Lineages, yeah. One is
Yamagata and Victoria.
Victoria and Yamagata. Again, they are antigenically not identical. Therefore, the current variant of H1N1, H3N2, Victoria, Yamagata doesn't change that much. They don't have this problem of antigenic drift. So they're kind of fixed permanent. And this new H1N1, so this is why it's called quadrivalent. The second topping up point is, we nicely said why we need annual vaccinations. I just want to add one more. Influenza infection is, as you all know, predominantly on the upper respiratory mucosa. And what is the incubation period? 24 hours, 36 hours, or 48 hours is the influenza incubation period. Because the body responds to the infection very rapidly. Now, if you had been vaccinated, say 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, your immunity level, antibody level has come down, but your memory is solid. If you had a disease of 2 weeks incubation period, you don't have to revaccinate. That infection would immediately kick in the anamnestic or booster response due to infection. But one day is asking too much of the immune system. Immune system cannot bring up antibody levels so high. And you need antibody transduced onto the mucosal surface in sufficient amounts to protect against disease. That is why every year you have to immunize so that your level of antibody stays high, and therefore your mucosal transduced antibody level also remains high. That is why you are protected against influenza disease. Okay, just to add the two little minor points to Ravi's excellent talk. Now, the subject topic is open to discussion. Parmesh, is Jagdish Chinappa coming now, or?
Yes, he's there, sir. He's there.
Yes.
Jagdish, go
Okay.
ahead.
Dr. Jagdish, you are muted.
Very
Sorry,
unusual.
sir. Sorry for coming in late because of the connectivity issues. Sir, wonderful talk as usual, Professor Ravi, and clarifications by Dr. Jacob John. Sir, I just one or two points which I wanted you to just clarify. One is some papers have indicated that vaccinating pregnant ladies would prevent any form of respiratory infection in the first 6 months of life for the infant. What are your comments? Should this be a national policy to immunize all pregnant ladies?
Unmute, Ravi.
You are muted, Ravi.
Sir, I said I claim ignorance. I will ask Professor Jacob John to take that question. Pregnant women protecting children up to 6 months.
Jagdish,
Yes,
your
sir.
question is a very important question. Just like COVID is underappreciated in pregnancy, so is influenza. The eye opener of influenza and pregnancy was when H1N1 came. ICU were admitting pregnant women with ARDS or very severe disease, and they were dying. Obstetricians have told me that they have never seen influenza death until H1N1 came, the pandemic H1N1. However, both H1N1 and H3N2 are bad news in pregnancy. So pregnancy itself is a risk factor for severe influenza. So therefore, if they are not annually vaccinated, a vaccination early in pregnancy is a very, very good idea. Ravi already had pointed out that the disease in infancy in the first 6 months or first 1 year is excellent. See, studies done in Nepal and various other places, and in Indonesia, even in India, in some small studies have shown that infant mortality due to respiratory infections are drastically reduced in women who have received influenza vaccine. So in Western countries, it is a routine practice to give influenza vaccination for pregnant women. We also should, we say if you want Indian data, we have to collect Indian data. Lack of data is not absence of evidence for problems in pregnancy. So in short, yes, Jagdish.
Thank you, sir. The other point which I had, which I want both the experts to comment is, are we moving towards mRNA technology for influenza?
One great advantage of COVID has been it brought several new platform technologies for vaccine production. Right now, nobody is making it because whatever people are making is not enough even for COVID. So my guess is end of next year, you will see mRNA vaccine technology being used for a number of diseases. And it is a versatile technology because everything can be done with machines. You do not require cell culture. You need not require whole virus to be cultivated in an egg or in a cell culture. Synthetically, you can make genes and hopefully it will be much faster. You will reduce that 5-month time taken for making influenza vaccines. I'm sure companies will be looking at it because influenza is much more prevalent than any other disease. As I showed in the slide, disease burden is very high. I leave it to Professor John to respond.
They're all very valid points that Ravi said, but there is a flip side to this problem. Ravi underlined 3 times the safety of existing influenza vaccine. There is a saying, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. The mRNA vaccines, both Pfizer and Moderna, and inexplicably, or we don't know the full details, are prone to induce some yes, we don't understand the pathogenicity.
They are basically, sir, sorry to interrupt, they are pro-inflammatory molecules. Basically, mRNA itself is a pro-inflammatory molecule.
Okay, so that pro-inflammatory molecule, its manifestation, the latest that we have learned is those who have had corneal transplant, maybe 10 years ago, they're getting rejection reaction within 10 days, 2 weeks of one of the mRNA vaccines. So although mRNA vaccine is a very elegant technology, after COVID, I think it should be relegated to cancers, those kind of things where the risk is so much smaller than the benefit. So my guess is that people will definitely make mRNA vaccine against flu. My worry is it may give a bad name to flu vaccination itself. That's my worry. Anyway, I leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. My questions are over.
Sir,
If there's
I have a
anything in the
question. Sir, you mentioned that this mRNA vaccine has caused some corneal rejections. How about people who have had organ transplants of other sorts? Would it actually reject the organ with these kind of vaccinations?
The corneal transplant rejection, ophthalmologists are very, very, very astute observers, and they treat them with steroid ointment and all that very quickly, and the reactions are overcome in a matter of a week or so. So you don't lose the cornea. That's the good news of this observation. As far as I know, I have not heard anything about kidney or other transplant people, because they're already on immunosuppressant treatment for, to prevent transplant rejection. So between these two, I think as far as I know, there is no particular risk of rejection of organ transplant. But the other inflammatory disease that worries us is the myocarditis,
Exactly.
pericarditis in young people.
Yes.
The son of a friend of my cousin or my niece in the United States, a week after mRNA vaccine, went on a 20-kilometer jogging, which he used to use previously. He fell dead on the en route, and his diagnosis was myocarditis. Okay, so I advise everyone, people who ask me, that for the next 3 weeks, no physical exercise, no gym, no jogging. You take complete break to your routine for 3 weeks. Make sure everything is okay. Then only you go back. So anyway, so mRNA vaccine has these kind of irritating or irritants speaking against it for a routine mass scale. Everybody getting vaccine every year, young and old.
Sir,
Back to
one
you.
more question added to this is you are saying that every year the flu vaccine has to be administered. So does this 3-week rest period apply for every year vaccination?
No, you misunderstood me. If you get mRNA vaccine, I'm posing it as a probability. Today, it is the mRNA vaccine against COVID that is causing this myocarditis, pericarditis problem wherever the mRNA vaccines are used. So you can forget about that. In India, we don't use either of these vaccines.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Ravi, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How do we make our country take influenza seriously? Jagadish and you have to sort of discuss that, because it's all nice to know so much of details.
Exactly. What we need is disease burden data. So one needs study at least of multiple centers involved in it on looking at the burden of influenza in 3 groups. I think will hopefully appeal to policymakers and politicians, and then those 3 groups should be children, pregnant women, and the elderly. So if the Indian Council of Medical Research or any other public health agency can put together a good study of 4 years or 5 years, like the encephalitis study which we did in Uttar Pradesh, Assam, and Bengal, which are aware. I believe only data speaks, and hard data, credible data will speak, and that people cannot counter. And unfortunately, we are very, very poor at doing these kind of studies. Hopefully, post COVID, with resources, people will be able to do that. I that's one thing that as you very rightly pointed out, and I know, we have lost very dear friends beyond 50-55, definitely due to influenza and its complications. So I think unless there is a, maybe we should talk to National Institute of Epidemiology or ICMR or NIV to impress on them that they should need study, even if it is 5 centers across the country. I think these 3 key populations we should do it. So that's my way of thinking. I'll ask Dr. Chinnappa to tell what he thinks.
So I think the basic issue is the indigenous production of the vaccine, and I think we have started the production of the vaccine in our country. At least one company has started. So I think gradually, if more companies join in and there is adequate production of the vaccine, automatically the government probably will be interested in implementing it. Till now, the imported vaccine was pretty expensive, and I think that may be one of the reasons why they did not focus on this particular problem. Now, with the vaccines becoming cheaper and also controlling other serious disorders, I think they will probably give more importance to influenza. This is my take, sir. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Supply and demand issue. And there is no demand, there will be no supply. And my worry is, will supply push demand? To a certain extent, yes. The knowledgeable and the medical profession and all, yes, but not the government. May I make a proposal that Ravi, Jagdish, Parmesh, and I create a document submitted to ICMR saying that here is a big blind spot that needs research. And as Ravi said, young children, pregnancy, and people above a particular age, whatever, they should be targeted for a disease burden analysis with virological diagnostics.
Characterization, yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, sir. Yeah. It has
Okay.
to be done. Otherwise, they will
Perfect, sir.
not.
Perfect.
So that we will convince ourselves with the logic and argument, rationale, then we can pass it on to ICMR or publish in IJMR or whatever. So, Parmesh,
Yes, sir.
ball is
I
in
agree.
your
I
court.
agree with you. I agree with you. Maybe I like to share some issue here. And 2009, when H1N1 came, I was in Geneva, WHO, World Health Assembly meeting at that time. It is only the Thailand stood up and demanded you give the prepare vaccine only for the English speaking countries and Brazil and all this thing, European countries. Why can't you give to Asian countries? You can make at 1/10 the cost. I think I'm proud to say that Jagdish added that we are proud to say we are producing the vaccine in 10 years period, and also this vaccine this year in 8 months we could able to make it, and wearing the mask within 10 days we could able to do it. Hats off to the policy makers. They listen to the scientific data. We have to project it as a matter of fact, and by that we could be able to achieve the goal, and also to prepare the vaccine health budget and increase of 137% for the vaccine only. These are all the positive way what things are going around. We can able to achieve our goal for the benefit of the society. I totally agree with you, sir.
Okay, Ravi, so the ball is in your court now. That is, he agrees with us so that he had to begin preparing a document. It's a boring work to write what you already know. So you, Jagdish, you, Parmesh, Jagdish, and me, we will four put together. This is a document recommending to ICMR to create data.
Evidence based.
Evidence. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Sir,
So I think if there are no questions, may I request Ravi Kumar, he is the
sir,
secretary of
can
the
you
Job
hear
of the
me, sir?
country. Yes. Any questions?
Yes, sir. I have a question, sir.
Please, sir, go ahead.
Is
Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Is there is any long-term side effects of vaccination? Not only for influenza, sir. I said about all vaccines because there is no research about long-term side effects of vaccination because people, I mean, like scientists, they only said vaccines have only it will help for people, but no one said about vaccination have some side effects. I don't hear, so I have this question, sir.
Okay, I have a tongue-in-cheek answer to that question. I will first mention the tongue-in-cheek answer and then come to the real problem. Yes, the the biggest side effect of vaccination, in particularly in adults, is they live longer. The very well-known fact globally, particularly influenza vaccine. The issue of long-term effects of vaccine depends on certain questions. Now, you know that a replicable agent injected into the body will replicate over a period of time. So the maximum mass is down the line somewhere. Whereas a non-replicating vaccine like flu or the inactivated virus vaccine against COVID, is the maximum is a minute after injection. Thereafter, it is actually coming down steadily, and the immune system is grappling with it, and the catabolic system is destroying whatever is left over. The antigen presenting cells or the immunocompetent cells only get a sample of what you inject. The rest of them are thrown out. I don't know, through liver, kidney, whatever. So I'm saying, by and large, non-replicating vaccines have no long-term side effects. You can look at all such vaccines, and you can see that there are all the vaccines that we know from 1900 onwards: toxoid vaccines, inactivated bacterial vaccines, inactivated viral vaccines. That's on one category. The live virus vaccine, of course, the infamous one is the oral polio vaccine and polio. That is a unfortunate thing. But measles, rubella, varicella, all those vaccines are, we believe, no long-term effect because they mimic the natural infection and it is scaled down. But as Ravi said, the Guillain-Barré syndrome kind of issue and the pro-inflammatory, they're all mostly something in the vaccine that keeps either growing or replicating, or it mimics infection. For example, the adenovirus in AstraZeneca vaccine, the adenoviral particles that were not taken up by the cell that takes up adenovirus, they just float around in the blood and they get attached to platelets, and the combination elicits antiplatelet antibody, and there's a cascade of things down the line. So these are all short-term adverse reactions. What long-term adverse reaction can you think of? I'm at a loss to think in terms of something that didn't happen in the first month happening later on. Now, intersusception, very interesting thing. Intersusception due to rotavirus vaccine is not a long-term effect. It is, if you take children and the intersusception-prone children and look at them for 1 year, and you count all intersusception cases, in the vaccinated, unvaccinated, they're more or less the same. In the vaccinated, it is concentrated in the first month after vaccination. In the unvaccinated, it's spread out the entire 1 year. So therefore, it is called triggering. We don't know what triggering means. So all of these that I know are short-term side effects. So autism was another suspected to be long-term side effect of MMR vaccine, which turned out to be a hoax. Just you first believe something and then you produce proof to prove it, and then the whole thing falls flat once people understand that the proof was not genuine. So in summary, I cannot think of any long-term side effects of an injected substance, either live or inactivated. But inactivated have, no biological reason to suspect a long-term effect. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Well,
Yes, Dr. Paramesh,
yes, sir.
Ball is in your court.
Okay, I request our Secretary of the Indian National Chapter of the COMHED, Professor Dr. Ravi Kumar, to give vote of thanks. Wonderful discussion, wonderful talk we had. Hats off to every one of you and all the participants. So nice of them. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Professor Jacob John and Professor Ravi. I've been reading your articles. I think New Indian Express, you've been writing very frequently on all the debates that's going on vaccination. It's been a pleasure to listen to you. It's been a fantastic insight into the vaccine and the technology. Let's hope we can vaccinate as many preventable diseases as possible. And your insights into mRNA, Dr. V, has been very useful. We hope someday it becomes a routine vaccination to avoid hospitalization. I would like to thank Dr. Jagdish Chinappa, who somehow managed to, with all the technical challenges, to join us on time. And thank you, sir. Thank you for your input. And thank you all the audience for your active deliberation. And I would like to thank Dr. Parmesh, Dr. Professor Ravi, and Professor Jacob John for joining us today for this monthly webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.